So even before we get to the question of what are you going to do 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, we have to address the question of how are we going to make ourselves useful and available to God 24 hours a day, 168 hours a week. Because if you think back to the story of Moses, God has prepared work for all of us to do. God has mapped out what will happen in all of our lives. And when God spoke to Moses and said, this is the work that I've prepared for you, this is how I'm going to raise you up and include you in my plans, Moses said to him, I can't go and speak to Pharaoh because I'm slow of speech. What you're requiring of me is public speaking, and I feel frightened to do it, which is a very common experience. Now, majoring in communication, it's not going to make you so confident in your own ability that you say, no problem, God, just step out of the way and let me do my thing. But at least it'll put you into the situation and make the situation familiar enough that if God speaks and says, who shall I send and who will go for us, you can be one of the ones to say, here am I, send me. And I wanted to talk about a few of the things that we learn how to do and a few of the things that we study in the communication field that if you match them up with what the Bible teaches us, God expects of us and requires of us, you might find that part of the reason to study communication is not just for the paycheck you'll eventually bring home, but for how you will be able to serve God in such a way that one day he can look you in the eye and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. One of the first things is that God requires of us that we comfort those, that we make ourselves available to those who are suffering, those who are hurting and grieving. And we study in the communication field how to do that most effectively. If you've ever needed to reach out to someone who's had a loved one die, who's had a marriage end, who's had a career fall apart, one of those traumatic life events where what they need more than anything is to be comforted, you can feel so very helpless and so very unsure of yourself. But we learn in communication classes, in interpersonal communication classes, what it takes to build the other person up, what kinds of things not to say, how not to persuade them, well, this was the way it needed to be. Oh gosh, you don't want to do that. But we talk about what are the best ways to be good comforters, and it is profoundly biblical to wait with those who suffer, to come alongside them and build them up. And that is one of the things that we prepare our abilities so that when God sends us as the person who brings relief in the form of comfort, we're prepared and we are familiar with the situation, and if God says, who shall we send? That's when you can say, here am I, send me. We also very obviously, we work on presentation skills. We work on being able to talk to an audience. And you might think, well, I don't want to go into a career where I'm going to have to do a lot of public speaking. But if you think about it, there are all sorts of people who really didn't see it coming, who really did not, when they daydreamed about what their lives would be, they didn't see a lot of public speaking coming. I don't think Peter, when he was fishing, thought he would ever speak to thousands of people at one time and tell them all about how the Messiah had come and how they had nailed him to the cross and they had to repent at once. I don't think that that was ever part of Peter's career plan, but that was the work that God had cut out for him. So it could be that you'll wind up in a teaching position in your church. It could be that in your community, you're going to need to be the one who speaks out against injustice. And if you've built up your speaking abilities to where you don't make like Moses and shy away and say, this is too much for me, and put yourself on the sidelines and make yourself unavailable to God, if you have that much confidence to where you'll step out, to where you'll have a mustard seed worth of faith, then that's the kind of thing that makes you available. That's the kind of thing that opens the doors to you participating in the work that God has prepared for you. It's also the case that what we study in communication, in interpersonal communication classes, we talk about how you build relationships, how you build up trust, how you meet people that you don't know very well, and over time, you reduce that uncertainty to where you can work together easily and comfortably together, and those are skills that can pay off richly later on when it comes time for you to mentor, when it comes time for you to disciple, to come alongside baby believers and to help them grow and put down roots, and to move them along from the first witnessing encounter to some of what the Bible teaches that is difficult and that people really have to wrestle with. So if you want to be available when God says, I have a new believer, and this new believer needs someone to disciple them and to help them grow in their faith, then that's something that a background of studying how to be a better communicator can make you available in that particular role. Finally, there are a lot of people in Eugene in particular, and really throughout our society, throughout our country, and throughout our world, that nobody listens to, and their stories are untold. And what God commands us to do in his word is to seek justice for those who are needy, to go to those who are forgotten, and to spread the word of their needs so that they don't feel that everyone has rejected them. One of the communication majors who graduated just this past year, a young lady by the name of Brittany Styling, she has 2 projects that she put together, and both of them, they were profoundly bound up with what she'd been studying. I don't think she originally got the inspiration from her classroom studies, but I do know that it's striking that her approach came out of things that we do very deliberately in the communication field. One of them is now an annual event, and it's called the Touch Project. And what the Touch Project does is a lot of Northwest Christian University students go to the Jefferson Street Bridge here in Eugene, where a lot of homeless people take shelter because they can get out of the rain, they're under this large overpass. And what we do is we go there and we take care of them in various ways where we actually touch them, put hands on them, help the women, help the ladies with makeovers, help the gentlemen by giving them haircuts and so forth, to show them that they are not outcast, that they are not discarded, they are not untouchable. And one of the things that we study in nonverbal communication is that touching has a profound effect as far as showing that you believe another person to be of value. It has a profound effect in communicating connection. One of the things that we do with very young children is we touch them a lot. We do a lot of skin-to-skin contact because you have to do that or babies will get sick and they will fail to put on weight. It's an illness called marasmus. And so what Brittany determined was there were a lot of people who are stigmatized, who are sort of outcast from our society, and one of the ways that happens is nobody touches them. Sometimes they go months or even years without feeling direct contact from another human being. So the Touch Project, which we now do every year, was her way of reaching out and showing Christ's love to these people. Now, what Brittany also did for her capstone project, she did something called the Listening Project, and she brought together a lot of nonprofits from around the area that incorporated listening into the kind of service that they do, and she also invited people from the community to come and listen to several presenters talk about the importance of listening and to talk about 3 groups in particular that really aren't listened to enough today. She talked about the elderly, she talked about teens, and in particular she talked about homeless teens and homeless people who are living on the streets. And the city of Eugene actually gave her an award for a highly ethical and highly important contribution to the life of the city. And so those are not things I think that she had in mind were going to advance her career, that they were just going to go on her resume and help her get a job, but they were ways that she could advance her ministry. They were ways that she could apply what was going on in the classroom and in her major, even though I think the inspiration came from her work in student ministries and from her own Bible studies. I don't think it originated with what she was studying in the classroom. Still, the parallels between the ways that she chose to express what God was moving her to do, the kind of passion that God was kindling in her, and the way that paralleled what was going on in her study of communication, I think is striking. So it really, if you think about when the young scholar came to Jesus and said, "Tell me out of all the commands, which ones are the most important?" And Jesus said, "Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." And the way you do that is to return to the Word over and over again so that God is revealed to you. You, in your prayer life, in your devotional life, go and give God your undivided attention. You learn about the world in all of your classes in college to learn about God's general revelation, to appreciate His handiwork, and to learn about His nature that way. But the other command was to love your neighbor as yourself. And if you think about the ways that you learn about your neighbor, the ways that you discard your prejudices, discard your stereotypes, the way you really perceive your neighbor, take all the filters down and really see them as they are, really listen to them and hear them for what they have to say, not what you expect them to say, and then how you communicate back to them that you value them, that they are loved, that they are included, and how you do it with more than just words, how you make that show in your deeds. Really, I can't think of a field other than communication studies that is more about opening up the way for you to love your neighbor as yourself. So there's plenty of time for us to get on to talk about career paths and what a diploma and a bachelor's in communication studies could prepare you for as far as earnings potential. But all that's secondary. You want to remember what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. Put first God's kingdom and his righteousness, and everything else will be provided unto you. And I think making the choice to take on the discipline of honing your communication abilities, your understanding of communication, and your skills as a communicator, that's a move to put yourself right in the right position, so when God says, this is your place in the building of my kingdom, you can say, God, I'm ready. I don't know what you have in store for me, and I know that I'm going to have to do it with the strength you provide and not my own strength, but I'm ready.